Faith is not just about believing, it's about doing. It's about stepping out even when you don't see the whole picture. So many people sit back and wait for God to change their situation, but they never take a step of faith. They pray for direction but refuse to move. They want breakthroughs but won't make adjustments. They expect miracles but won't walk in obedience. That's not how it works. If you want to see God move in your life, you have to be willing to move first. Think about Peter stepping out of the boat. He could have sat there waiting for the waves to calm down, waiting for reassurance, waiting for proof that he wouldn't sink. But that's not what happened. The moment he stepped out, something supernatural took place. The water became solid beneath his feet. He was able to do what was impossible, not because he had all the answers, but because he was willing to trust. The miracle didn't happen while he was sitting in the boat. It happened when he moved. And the same principle applies to you. Too many times people convince themselves that they're waiting on God when in reality God is waiting on them to trust, waiting on them to obey, waiting on them to take that first step. Maybe that means applying for that job even though you don't feel qualified. Maybe that means reconciling a broken relationship even though it's uncomfortable. Maybe that means finally surrendering something you've been holding on to for too long. Whatever it is, it requires action. Faith is not passive. It is active. It is stepping forward before the door opens. It is believing before you see. It is trusting when the outcome is uncertain. Some of the greatest blessings in life come after you take that first step. It's in the obedience, in the movement, in the willingness to trust that God does His greatest work. But if you refuse to move, you will never experience the fullness of what He has for you. Some people say, I'll obey when I feel ready. But obedience is not about feelings, it's about faith. If you wait until you feel ready, you'll never take action. There will always be doubts, always be fears, always be reasons to stay where you are. But when God calls, He doesn't ask if you feel ready, He asks if you are willing. There comes a point when you have to decide, will you keep waiting or will you start walking? Will you stay in the boat or will you step onto the water? Because the truth is, if you never take a step, you'll never know what God could have done. The breakthrough you're waiting for, the change you desperately want, the answer to your prayers, it's on the other side of action. But nothing changes if you don't. Faith is not just about believing. It's about doing. It's about stepping out, even when you don't see the whole picture. So many people sit back and wait for God to change their situation, but they never take a step of faith. They pray for direction but refuse to move. They want breakthroughs but won't make adjustments. They expect miracles but won't walk in obedience. That's not how it works. If you want to see God move in your life, you have to be willing to move first. Think about Peter stepping out of the boat. He could have sat there, waiting for the waves to calm down, waiting for reassurance, waiting for proof that he wouldn't sink. But that's not what happened. The moment he stepped out, something supernatural took place. The water became solid beneath his feet. He was able to do what was impossible, not because he had all the answers, but because he was willing to trust. The miracle didn't happen while he was sitting in the boat. It happened when he moved. And the same principle applies to you. Too many times people convince themselves that they're waiting on God when in reality God is waiting on them to trust, waiting on them to obey, waiting on them to take that first step. Maybe that means applying for that job even though you don't feel qualified. Maybe that means reconciling a broken relationship even though it's uncomfortable. Maybe that means finally surrendering something you've been holding on to for too long. Whatever it is, it requires action. Faith is not passive. It is active. It is stepping forward before the door opens. It is believing before you see. It is trusting when the outcome is uncertain. Some of the greatest blessings in life come after you take that first step. It's in the obedience, in the movement, in the willingness to trust that God does His greatest work. But if you refuse to move, you will never experience the fullness of what He has for you. Some people say, I'll obey when I feel ready. But obedience is not about feelings, it's about faith. If you wait until you feel ready, you'll never take action. There will always be doubts, always be fears, always be reasons to stay where you are. But when God calls, He doesn't ask if you feel ready. He asks if you are willing. There comes a point when you have to decide, Will you keep waiting, or will you start walking? Will you stay in the boat, or will you step onto the water? Because the truth is, if you never take a step, you'll never know what God could have done. The breakthrough you're waiting for, the change you desperately want, the answer to your prayers, it's on the other side of action. But nothing changes if you don't. So many people find themselves waiting for the right opportunity, waiting for circumstances to change, waiting for a sign from God that now is the time to move. They convince themselves that once everything lines up, then they'll take that step of faith. But that's not how God works. God doesn't call people to wait until everything is perfect. He calls them to step out, to trust, and to believe that He will provide as they move forward. Look at how God has worked throughout Scripture. He didn't part the Red Sea while the Israelites were still standing in Egypt. He parted it when they were already on the move, fleeing from Pharaoh, desperate for deliverance. He didn't bring down the walls of Jericho before the Israelites marched. He told them to walk around those walls for 7 days to move forward, even when it looked like nothing was happening. Again and again, God's power was revealed after His people moved, not before. But too often people hesitate. They want to see the provision before they step out in faith. They want confirmation before they commit. They want guarantees before they obey, and as a result, they remain stuck. They wonder why nothing is changing, why doors aren't opening, why they still feel trapped in the same struggles. But the truth is, God moves when you move. When you take that first step, even when you don't know what the outcome will be, you are showing Him that you trust Him. And that's when He steps in. Faith is not about certainty, it's about trust. It's about believing that even when you can't see the whole picture, God does. It's about knowing that He will never call you to something without also equipping you for it. That means you don't have to have everything figured out before you obey. You don't have to have all the resources before you begin. You don't have to wait until you feel ready, because the truth is you may never feel ready. But if God is calling you, He has already prepared the way. Think about Peter when he was out on the boat and saw Jesus walking on water. Jesus told him to come, and in that moment, Peter had a choice. He could have stayed where it was safe, where he knew he wouldn't sink, where everything was predictable, or he could step out of the boat and trust that if Jesus was calling him, then Jesus would also sustain him. And the moment he stepped out, something incredible happened. He walked on water. He did something impossible, not because he understood how, not because he had a guarantee, but because he moved in faith. Nothing will change in your life until you take that step. God is ready, He is willing, but He is waiting for you to trust Him enough to move forward. The miracle you are waiting for, the breakthrough you've been praying for, it's on the other side of your obedience. But nothing changes if you don't. Fear has a way of holding people back, of keeping them from stepping into the life they were meant to live. It whispers doubts, fills the mind with worst-case scenarios, and convinces people that playing it safe is the best option. But fear is a liar. It will always tell you that you're not ready, that you're not capable, that you don't have what it takes. And if you listen to it, if you allow it to dictate your choices, you will find yourself stuck in the same place year after year, never moving forward, never growing, never experiencing what God has prepared for you. God never intended for His people to live in fear. Over and over again throughout Scripture, He says, do not fear. That's not a suggestion, it's a command, because fear is not from Him. Fear is the tool the enemy uses to keep people from stepping into their calling, from pursuing the dreams God placed in their hearts, from living a life of faith. And the only way to overcome fear is to move forward despite it. Some people are waiting for fear to disappear before they take action. They think that once they feel confident, once they feel ready, once they feel secure, then they will take that next step. But that's not how faith works. Faith is stepping forward while fear is still present. It's choosing to trust God more than the voices of doubt. It's deciding that fear will not have the final say in your life. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward in spite of it. Think about Joshua. When he was about to lead the Israelites into the promised land, God told him over and over, be strong and courageous. Why? Because He knew Joshua was afraid. He knew the challenges ahead looked overwhelming. He knew that the enemy would try to intimidate him. But he also knew that if Joshua focused on him instead of his fears, victory was already secured. The same is true for you. Whatever it is that fear is trying to keep you from, whether it's a new opportunity, a change you know you need to make, a step of faith that feels uncertain, know this: fear only has the power you give it. The moment you decide to move forward anyway, fear begins to lose its grip. The moment you stop letting it control you, you step into a new level of freedom. God has not given you a spirit of fear. He has given you power, love, and a sound mind. That means you don't have to live in fear. You don't have to let it keep you from the life He has for you. You have everything you need to take that step of faith, to walk into what He has prepared, to trust Him even when the path ahead is uncertain. But you must be willing to move, because nothing changes if you don't. Too many people are waiting for the right moment, the right conditions, the right set of circumstances before they take action. They tell themselves, I'll start when I have more time, or I'll move forward when I feel more prepared. But the reality is, there will never be a perfect moment. If you're always waiting for everything to fall into place before you make a change, you will never move forward. Life will always have uncertainties, challenges, and obstacles. But that should never be an excuse to stay where you are. Growth requires action. It requires stepping out even when things don't seem ideal. It means pushing past feelings of doubt, of hesitation, of uncertainty, and trusting that when you move forward in faith, God will provide what you need. Some people sit back and pray for change, but they never take a step toward it. They ask God to open doors, but they never walk toward them. They want something different, but they aren't willing to do anything differently. But the truth is, faith is not passive. Faith moves. Faith acts. Faith takes steps, even when the outcome isn't clear. Think about Abraham. God called him to leave his home, his family, everything familiar, and go to a place he had never seen. God didn't give him all the details. He didn't lay out a clear road map. He simply said, go, and Abraham obeyed. He didn't wait until everything made sense. He didn't wait until he had all the answers. He moved because he trusted that if God was calling him, then God would also sustain him. That's the kind of faith that leads to breakthrough. It's the kind of faith that refuses to settle, that refuses to stay stuck, that refuses to wait for the perfect time before taking action. Because the perfect time will never come. The time to move is now. The time to take that step is today. There are people who have spent years dreaming about what they want to do, thinking about the changes they need to make, talking about what they wish was different. But they never take the first step. They are waiting for certainty, for a guarantee, for a sign that everything will work out exactly as they want it to. But that's not how faith operates. Faith means stepping out before the answers come. It means trusting God enough to move forward even when you don't have it all figured out. God is not calling you to sit and wait for the perfect moment. He is calling you to act. He is calling you to trust Him enough to take the first step, to believe that He will make a way even when you can't see it yet. He has already gone before you. He has already prepared the path. But you have to be willing to step out, to move, to trust that He is with you, because nothing changes if you don't. Knowing the real eventuality, there comes a time when you have to stop talking about change and start walking in it. So many people spend their days thinking about what they want to do, what they wish was different, what they hope will improve, but they never take that first step. They stay in the same routine, trapped by fear, doubt, or simple procrastination, hoping that someday things will be different. But someday is not a day on the calendar. Waiting will not bring change. Hoping will not bring results. At some point, action is required. God has given you everything you need to take the next step, but He will not force you to move. He calls, He prepares, He equips, but He does not push. He is waiting on you to trust Him enough to take that step of faith. Some people say they are waiting on God, but in reality, God is waiting on them. They pray for change, but they do nothing to walk toward it. They ask for open doors, but they never get up and knock. They seek guidance, but they do not take action on what they already know. All throughout Scripture, God moves when His people move. And when the Israelites stood before the Jordan River, God did not part the waters until the priest stepped in. When the man with the withered hand came to Jesus, he was told to stretch it out. The miracle happened in the movement. The breakthrough came in obedience. The provision arrived when faith was put into action. It is easy to make excuses for why change has not happened. It is easy to blame circumstances, to point to obstacles, to say if only things were different. But the truth is, those excuses are keeping you stuck. Change begins with a decision. A decision to trust God more than your fears. A decision to stop waiting for perfect conditions. A decision to stop delaying what you know needs to be done. The enemy wants you to believe that staying where you are is safer, that if you wait long enough, the fear will go away, that if you hesitate just a little longer, things will become easier. But that is a lie. Fear does not leave by waiting. It leaves by walking. You overcome doubt by moving forward. You conquer hesitation by stepping out in faith. God has already gone before you. He has already prepared the way. He has already equipped you for what is ahead. But you must be willing to move. The life you are praying for, the change you are longing for, the breakthrough you are hoping for, it is on the other side of action. It is waiting for you to take that first step. You do not have to have all the answers. You do not have to see the full picture. You simply have to trust that when you move forward, God will meet you there, because nothing changes if you don't. Life is full of opportunities for change, growth, and transformation, but none of it happens without action. No matter how much you think about it, no matter how many times you pray about it, no matter how much you wish for it, nothing will change unless you decide to take that step of faith. So many people get stuck in the cycle of waiting for the right moment, the perfect circumstances, the assurance that everything will work out exactly as they hope. But the truth is, waiting does not produce results. Waiting does not bring breakthrough. Waiting does not lead to growth. Only action does. God never intended for his people to sit in fear, uncertainty, or hesitation. He calls his people to move, to trust, to walk forward in faith, even when the path is unclear. The greatest stories in Scripture are about men and women who refused to stay where they were. Abraham left his homeland. Moses stepped into the Red Sea before it parted. Joshua marched around Jericho before the walls fell. Peter stepped out of the boat before he could walk on water. Every time, action came first. Faith was demonstrated by movement, and that movement unlocked the power of God. Some people are waiting for their fears to disappear before they take a step. They think that once they feel completely confident, once all doubt is gone, once everything makes perfect sense, then they will be ready. But that is not how faith works. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to move forward despite fear. Courage is not about feeling strong. It is about trusting in the one who is strong. If you wait for all uncertainty to fade, you will never move. If you wait for every obstacle to disappear, you will stay where you are. But if you trust God enough to step forward, even in the midst of uncertainty, you will see his faithfulness in ways you never imagined. Change requires a decision. It is not something that happens automatically. It does not come to those who merely desire it. It comes to those who are willing to work for it. The enemy would love nothing more than for you to stay stuck, to remain trapped in fear, to never take the step that leads to the life God has for you. He knows that the moment you decide to move, the moment you decide to trust God more than your fears, the moment you step into action, you will step into victory. Do not let another day pass without making the decision to act. Do not let another season go by while you remain in the same place. Everything you are praying for, everything you are believing for, everything you know God has called you to, it is on the other side of action. God is not asking you to have all the answers. He is not asking you to figure everything out. He is simply asking you to trust him enough to take the next step, because nothing changes if you don't.